Welcome to the Bits of Good Bootcamp, and today we're going to be talking about middleware in Express. So let's dive right in. First, let's take a look here at a high level of what Express is. By now, you've been using it for at least a week, and it's really important to kind of step back and really think about what this piece of software is doing for us. So at the end of the day, what Express is an HTTP request processing pipeline. So what this means is that as requests are coming in, Express is handling our requests, and then using the routes that we create, it's triggering one of those routes that matches what the request path is. So at the end of the day, that's really what it is. And I have a quick little example here that'll help us clarify this point. So we see here on the left we have two routes, one for home and one for logout. And on the right we have a visualization of what this pipeline really looks like. So you see at the top a request comes in. The first thing Express does is check to see if it's a GET request going to the home path. And here we see that maybe the request is not, and then so it continues and it looks down to see is it a GET request going to the logout path. And if it is in fact, then it'll send goodbye, and if it's not, it'll go to a 404. And again, just another example, if we had received a request that was actually going to home, then it would check that first box and then goes to send home page. That's what it would do instead of continuing down this. So the other thing that really matters, and some of you guys have probably already experienced this, is that route order is really important when it comes to typing out your routes in Express inside your app.js. So here we have two routes on the left here. They're both just going to the slash route, the very base route, and one is going to be sending option A and one will send option B. So what do you think will happen if we get a request to that main route? Is it going to go to option A or is it going to go to option B? The correct answer is that it's going to go to option A, because at this point option B is unreachable. Like, nothing will ever be able to get option B sent back to it because the first route will always take it. So this is just something that really is important to remember, is that the order that you are declaring your routes in Express matters. So you should make your more specific routes at the top and your more general routes at the bottom to avoid one of your routes accidentally taking something that it's not supposed to. Okay, cool. So now we're going to talk about something new, and it's called App.use. And so as we were doing before, we were using things like app.get, app.post, app.put, and those matched a specific type of request method. App.use will actually match any request method. And so if we look here, app.use first, that will match with anything that matches that prefix. So first second, first x, all of those are going to match with this. Likewise here, app.use and slash will match with every single route, because every route at the beginning has a slash, so that will prefix and match with everything. You can actually also just ignore, you can choose to not include a route in app.use, in which case it's going to use the default route, which is to match with everything. So yeah, it just basically matches with everything. So here we just have as an example, if I were to use this piece of code, app.use test, every single route that starts with test is going to get the response res.send, woohoo, regardless of if it's a get or a post or a put. So we're getting to this idea of middleware in Express. And so what middleware is essentially a route that does not send a response. So most of the routes that we've been using so far, at the end you've always had to do res.send or res.render, because the entire point of having a route is to be able to respond to it, to a request. But what middleware is something that is by its very nature not meant to send a request, but just do some sort of processing for later routes. And this is actually something you should have seen already with body parser. This is something that we've already used in our projects to be able to access things that were posted to us in rec.body. And so body parser is middleware. So you see here we're using app.use, so it's going to match with every single request that comes in, and we're just applying this method essentially to the request that's coming in. So let's look at another example here with the event pipeline here. So what we see when we get a request, the first thing, it's going to match with this app.use every single time. And so it's going to come over here and it's going to add rec.body, and then it's going to keep on going down, and then eventually it's going to get to our students, and this is actually a typo here. It's going to get to students, and then it'll respond from there. Cool, so this is an example of middleware. So the thing to note about middleware is that we have this third argument for all of our routes that we haven't introduced yet, and we typically call that third argument next. And this is what allows Express to keep going. So as we saw here, after we do the App.use body parser, we want it to continue, and we want it to look for the next matching route. And the way that we do that is by having this next. Essentially what it does is it tells Express, okay, I'm done with this route, keep looking for other routes in the pipeline that this request is going to match with. So here, if we look at what's going on here, we have an app.get with a slash, and then we should be console logging, spooky month is my favorite, and then we're calling next, and then it should match again here, and then we'll finally get the response of boo. So in our console, we should see spooky month is my favorite, and then finally in the web page, we'll see res.send boo. So it's actually hitting both of those routes. Here's kind of an example using next. So this is just stepping through the code we just saw. So we're going to get a request, and it's going to match with that first get, where we'll be using our middleware, which in this case isn't rec.body, but it's just the console log. And then it'll hit next, which will get to the second one, and then it'll send boo. Sorry about this text being off. Okay, so let's take a quick pop quiz now. What do you think is going to happen here? So we're looking at it. We have an app.get, then we're saying res.send spooky spooky, next, and then we have another route. So if we're getting a request that comes in matching the slash route, what do you think is going to happen? Pause the video and take a second to think about it. All right, the answer is that we're actually going to get this error, because what's going to happen is we're going to be sending this response back, res.send spooky spooky, that is responding to the request. But then we're telling Express like, okay, just keep looking for other things. So it's going to hit, you're going to hit next, it's going to look at the next item in the pipeline, and then it's going to try to send res.send boo. But the problem here is that we've already responded to the request. So that's why it's saying here, cannot set header after they have been sent to the client, because we sent something to the client here, and then now here we're trying to send something again, and it won't let us. So this is something to remember when you're using middleware. You cannot use res.send or res.render and then call next. It's a one or the other kind of deal here for the middleware. So here's kind of a really practical example of when middleware might be useful for you. So here, let's see, we have a slash route, and here we're displaying our home page. And presumably on this home page, there's some way to authenticate and validate yourself so that the web page and the server knows who you are. And then we have this second middleware chunk. So this part right here is middleware. And what we're doing is we're checking to see if the user is authenticated. Don't worry about what the implementation for user is authenticated, but just think that it's some function in this file that is authenticating users based on the request object. And if the user is authenticated, it's going to call next, so that'll continue down the Express pipeline. However, if the user is not authenticated, so if this is false, then it's going to send you are not logged in, and then that will be the end of the Express pipeline. It will not hit get secret here because we're already sending our response and we're not calling next. But if the user is authenticated, we'll call next, and then it'll come down here, and then if the route is secret, then it'll render our secret page for the user. But the only way that this route will ever get hit is if you go through this route first, because it will match with everything, and then you will only be able to get past this route through the next if the user is authenticated. So like I said, this is a pretty practical example of where middleware fits in with the Express stack. You can kind of imagine this being useful in a lot of applications. And finally, just something to point out here is these are some pretty common middleware that you'll probably use in your development experience going forward with Express. Body parser you've already touched, so I don't need to explain that very much. Morgan is like a logging software, logging library that will just print out a bunch of stuff to your console to show you what's going on. It'll let you know when you get incoming requests and things like that, and it has a lot of different settings that you can set, and that'll help you control what gets logged and what doesn't get logged. And then Helmet is another little neat piece of software, and what this library does is essentially it sets a bunch of headers for all of your responses that help maintain the security of the responses and remove extra information that your client doesn't need to know about what your server is doing. So that's a pretty simple one too. You'll see it going forward in some code bases probably. All right, that's it for today. Good work.